It's Entrepreneur Rap, episode 28.
Can you believe it?
It's been a while, Brett. Brett Regan, David Brickley, again, Entrepreneur Rap on iTunes, Facebook Live, the whole deal. Really pleased and excited to talk to our guest here over the telephone. We have Scott Fritz. He's the author of the 40-Hour Work Year. Scott, what's going on, man?
Great to be with you guys. Looking forward to hearing what you got going on.
Yeah, thanks so much. Just a quick background, was able to see you speak at EO Alchemy. I think all three of us here are in the entrepreneur organization. We're down here in San Diego. What chapter are you in again?
Well, I'm actually not in EO any longer. I was in from 2000 to 2011. I was in back when it was called White EO.
Yep. Very cool. So you did a really, I want to give you credit for the speech that you gave at EO Alchemy. I think it was really eye-opening for me and a lot of others, and made me go out and get your book a couple days later. And myself and Brett have read the whole thing. I think it was just a really good read. And I wanted to get your thoughts. I mean, essentially you were able to create a business, a PEO company that was making $160 million in revenue per year. And you were able in 18 months to scale out of that company to the point where you only had to work 40 hours a year, which I think is every entrepreneur and business owner's dream. So I wanted to dig into that a little bit. I know there's a lot to unpack, but can you kind of talk us through that story and how it all came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I talked about in San Diego and in the book, I realized early on, fortunately, that just working harder and doing the same things more wasn't going to necessarily get me where I wanted to be in my business. And the moment came to me from a standpoint of a physical breakdown, quite honestly, was when I had major stress from being the only salesperson in the organization and thinking I had to sell everything, and had a either nervous breakdown or panic attack, whatever you want to call it, and realized I needed to start hiring some salespeople. I was going to end up 6 feet under at some point if I kept running my body this way. So that was kind of my original, what I call my mirror moment,
right,
of getting myself out of the way. And then the impetus was, as I talked about in San Diego, as my wife and I got kind of tired of living in the cold of Michigan and decided to move somewhere sunny, which ended up being Las Vegas. And that's what really launched the transition plan, as I call it, out of my business.
And how many years had you been working in the business prior to your mirror moment? And can you give us maybe, roundabout numbers? How many hours per week were you working at that point?
Yeah, so I was, that was about 2.5, right close to 2.5 years working in the business. And, I was around 90 hours a week. Office time and or presenting time. And then of course I still worked on the weekend because as I went over in the book, I don't think I probably talked about this at Alchemy, but I had to spend the weekend preparing my proposals because I didn't have any time during the week to do that. So in reality, I mean, really it was well into the 110, 115 hours a week when you add in the weekend time.
Yeah. And I think one thing that really, was refreshing to me about this book, and I'd heard probably 10 or 15 different people recommend this book, but I get recommendations so frequently that it's hard to land on one. But after I read it, it was really refreshing because I think a lot of entrepreneurs deal with guilt. And right now in the media landscape, there are so many speakers that are talking about grind, hustle, wake up earlier, go to bed later, don't watch TV, all these things. So for me to read that about someone who said, I want to step away from this, I want to work less, I think that kind of helped a little bit with my guilt of feeling like, why am I feeling like it would be nice to not have to be in the office every single day? So when there are new entrepreneurs with as many different narratives as are going on with how you should run a business, what do you tell them in terms of, how to decide how you're going to run a business?
Yeah, great points in question. I have an angel investment I'm involved with, and the guy just had his mirror moment. Unfortunately, it was with a physical problem with his wife, and young guy in his early 30s, and that was his mirror moment. So my first question to anyone is, well, have you had your mirror moment yet? And if they haven't read the book, then I tell them my story. And if they haven't had that mirror moment, whatever that is, unfortunately, in a lot of cases is a divorce. It's hard to really get your head around explaining to them, experience sharing with them why there's more to this than just, the golden ring out there. Again, I'm not saying I would say don't go out there and hustle and work hard, but you need to put in priority for yourself what's the most important. And I think if people would just sit down and do that more often, they would avoid a lot of the pitfalls. So that's usually where I start with somebody who hasn't had their mirror moment yet, is having that discussion.
Yeah, and going into EO Alchemy, to be honest with you, as far as my mindset, we own a digital marketing, social first company. It's pretty much client services at the end of the day. And walking into Alchemy, I wasn't really thinking. I thought client services, it's not really a sellable business. There's no real reason to make it an asset. But you made a really great statement during your speech, and you said, quote, "Would you buy your own company? And if you would, how much would you pay for it?" And I think you've probably said that during multiple speeches, and there's always that awkward grumbling in the crowd, which is something you probably came to know as something that happens. But talk about that mindset a little bit, because I think that was one thing that you said that really opened up my mind.
Yeah, again, so the industry I was in at the time, and this, we got into it before the dot boom, dot bubble, whatever you want to call it, happened. There was a big effort out there to, do roll-ups of PEOs, businesses in my marketplace, and then do reverse mergers with Amex paper or whatever, and just kind of roll them up and have a payday. And so I get pinged by these people literally at least once a month, sometimes more. And I realized that before I was going to keep wasting my time, because quite honestly, a lot of it was wasted time, I needed to figure out what was my number. And so my number always was, when these guys would call me, and they're New Yorker, broker, dealer people, okay, if you'll pay me 6 times what I make a year, all cash at close, I'm interested in talking.
Yep.
And that really, in most cases, got rid of, and I'm not joking, 99% of them said, well, that's nowhere near what the deal will be like, so there's no reason to talk. So that's kind of how I got my head around that. And that was always my deal. So I had a business partner, 50-50. She knew I said this to people. She didn't necessarily agree with it. She came to agree with it as time went on. But that helped me sleep at night and helped me really focus on what I was doing with my company versus just winging it,
Mm-hmm. I found it interesting in the book as well when you talked about kind of making this decision to step back. You and your business partner had a conversation about the money that you were willing to give up temporarily to do that. And I think for us, we're always kind of confused on how much should we be taking from the business versus that money, because we know that there is a return. So in the early stages, and then when you made that decision to take a pay cut, how are you determining what you are worth, what you should be paying yourself from the company, knowing that the extra money that you were taking could go towards growth?
Yeah, and this came up actually at breakfast with a forum before I did my talk, and I told them about this. I just didn't get a chance to hit on it, in the 55 minutes I had to talk. So we were very disciplined about this. I do not believe if entrepreneurs keep money in the business, I don't think that's a good strategy. So when Karen and I finally started being in the black, and there was some money there, and this is before we started taking, actual compensation and payroll, because we were still trying to get it figured out. We basically said we're going to keep 50% every month of the profit in the company, and we're going to distribute the other 50%. And by the time we got to our last 2 to 3 years in business, we were keeping 10% every month in the company, and we were distributing 90% of the profit every month.
Interesting.
And my rationale for this is, and I'm a frugal, disciplined person, so is Karen. Worst case scenario, you make a loan back to the business if you need the capital. But why are you keeping the capital in the business earning nothing, and the potential not only of spending it on frivolous things, but the potential of theft of those funds? So I do this with all my coaching clients. I have them set a number that they're comfortable with. Most of them start around 50, 60%. And literally within 2 years or less, they're up to the 80, 90% because they're getting what I'm selling them in that. Why are you keeping the cash in your business? Get it out of the company.
So when you work, Scott, with startups or different businesses, what's the main thing you see that they're doing wrong? Or, you talk a lot in the book about the ownership paradox and SOPs and job descriptions and things like that. But what is the one common theme you see that businesses aren't doing enough of?
Yeah, good question. So I facilitated Accelerator for 6 years, the other program.
Yep.
And invariably, the number one issue in there was my issue, which was there's the owner and or a so-called salesperson, and that was it. You've got to get those sales up and those numbers up, I believe, on the top line. So that's the number one area I see problems with. The second area I see a problem with, and this has to do with a lot of entrepreneurs who don't have business partners or someone they trust, quite honestly, is they don't have a right-hand person or an operational person. So they may be great at sales, and then they don't have the ops side. So that's 1, 2. And then the third area, if they've already got the sales going and the ops going, the third area is finance department, accounting, systems around their financials. I mean, I've gone into companies that are in the 20, 30 million range, and they're still struggling in that area. So those are kind of the 1, 2, 3s that I look at.
Yeah, I think we've got all 1, 2, 3 of those going on.
Yeah. So to get in the ownership paradox a little bit, I like in your book, again, really a short read, about 100 pages, but there's a little bit of workshops in there, if you will, where you can kind of write in the book and do some exercises. And the ownership paradox is really interesting, where it really breaks down how much you're in the business related to company value. So was that something that you just kind of came up with on your own, or based on all these different conversations, you've realized this is kind of the main concern in terms of value and how much you're working in the business?
No, and again, I don't remember if I mentioned it at the talk, but I actually saw that at a conference I was at. It was a valuation conference. It was a breakout. I don't think it was an EO conference yet. Several years, a couple of decades ago now. But and the guy that was doing it did that graph just like that. Mm-hmm. And his whole point was he had another model that went with it, which again, there's been a lot of empirical study around this, that most companies once started reached their maximum sale price in year 7. And if they wait past year 7, they won't hit that number again until year 12.
Interesting.
So this kind of stuck with me. That stuck with me as well, because we really looked at selling in year 7. We were pretty close. I mean, we sold in year 10 technically, but that paradox chart of how he showed, just get out of your business. If you do nothing else, go back and share this with your team, which is exactly what I did. I went back and told my team, hey guys, you want to be on this rocket ride with me, then get me focused on working on the business so this rocket can get, further into outer space, so to speak.
And when you were communicating with the staff that you wanted to do this, what kind of methods were you using to get buy-in? Were you giving options, profit share? What was the incentive other than the growth of the company for the staff to be on board with the vision?
So first I'll give you a little saying that I heard a long time ago, and I use it. They were never my staff, they were my team. Staff is an infection.
Nice.
I like that.
Feel free to use that. So, because again, just a little side note, you don't say your executive staff. Most people say your executive team. And so the executive team is off putting all these plans together. We're going to go back and share it with the staff. So that's where I kind of make that with. Incentives. So I'm not somebody who gave units or shares of the company. After our 4th year in business, 2 times a year, we would open up the opportunity to purchase owner units in $50,000 tranches, up to, I think we started at $250 and ended up at $500,000. And Seth, the person who ended up running my company ultimately, he's the only one that ever bought any. He bought 2 $50,000 tranches over the 3 years. But nobody else ever stepped up. Of course, obviously they would have done all right if they'd done that. But our main incentives were really straightforward in that there were no caps. So what I found a lot of people do in their businesses is they set up a bonus structure that has this capped payout, and it may just be something they pulled out of their what, mm-hmm. or it may be off some sort of a calculation. So we had no caps though. We said, look, here's our annual forecast, here's our budget. For every dollar past this amount, which was to keep the lights on and help the company run, Karen and I are going to share 10% of that number. So from a profit standpoint, there were payroll coordinators who were making 30, 35 grand base, but they were making another 10, 15 in bonus. I mean, that's pretty much unheard of in that kind of a level, pay level, where you're basically running payrolls all day and you're making another 40% in bonus every year.
So when you and Karen sit down and decide to make this 18-month plan where you're going to transition out of the company, You talk about in the book that the most, I wouldn't say annoying, but the hardest process was to just get down the standard operating procedures for everything you did at the company and kind of develop that manual and rule book. Is that something that, I mean, first, explain how difficult that is, and then B, is that something that you think all businesses kind of lack in terms of making sure that's shored up?
Well, yeah. So I'll start with the end question. All businesses that have not sat down and done this lack that. Which, in my experience, again, if we're talking companies under $10 million in revenue, I mean, I hate to use the 99%, but it's up there. The 10 to 50 million is probably 70%ish. Over 50 million, maybe only 20-30% are struggling. Because again, it's kind of self-evident. I don't believe you can get to those kind of numbers without having the stuff buttoned down.
Yeah.
It's just kind of the way it is. So the younger, earlier stage or smaller companies, which you guys know the numbers, I mean, only 4% of companies ever go over $1 million. So if you just use that statistic, you got 96% of the companies don't have strong systems. And I believe the main reason they don't get over $1 million, 10 million, et cetera, is they don't put the time and effort and resources into building the systems. So yeah, I'd say in the book, it was the most onerous thing I ever did. And back then, especially without some of the software and cloud-based things and video technology and mobile and all that we have now, it was very difficult because you're training and putting these things together really in kind of a maze of unknowing, are you going the right direction?
And I really think from an ownership standpoint, trying to download everything that's kind of obvious or common sense in your brain onto a document, and it definitely takes a lot of time. How granular did you get with it? Because, you know, reading Good to Great by Jim Collins, he talks about getting the right people on the bus, and some of this stuff should be common sense. But in your experience, how granular do you get with the operating procedures?
Well, yeah. So Henry Ford time motion studies, going back to my college days, learning about all that, management courses and all that. We did exactly that. So we had each person in the department. I use payroll as an example because that was a very transaction-based, day-to-day type department. They did 15-minute logs, 15-minute increments of what they were doing every day for 2 weeks.
Interesting.
So I think when we started at the time, we had 6 payroll people and a payroll director, a payroll coordinator. So they would capture that information. At the end of 2 weeks, the executive team would get together with the director of the department, and we'd go through and identify best practices throughout those days. We'd then say, all right, these are best practices. Go back, institute these into that department, and do it again. And that took us about 3 months, 2-week increments over 3 months. So you're talking, 6 go-arounds of that. And then finally, we had now our basic operations manual for payroll, which I would say is probably 95%, about as tight as we could get it. And then started the training everybody about how we were going to run and onboard and run this department going forward. So correct, you've got to have the right people. But again, I'm a ready, fire, aim kind of person. If you've always got to get ready, aim, fire, if you're always worried about the aim, and you've probably heard this from other guests you've had on, you're not going to make progress. I mean, you got to get it out there, get it working, and let people be trained on it and get it breathing in the structure of your company.
Yeah. So for some of your longer tenured teammates, was there pushback from people who had maybe started at the company when things were maybe a little more fast and loose that had pushback or were annoyed and upset by these new strict, kind of micro management type procedures that were being rolled out?
And again, that's a good question. And this, I'll give this with a story. I spoke in, where was I? Just somewhere in Louisiana. I wasn't in New Orleans, but anyway, about 5 years ago, and there was a guy there. It was Entrepreneur Week. There was a reporter there, and he actually said he'd read the book before I did my talk. And he goes, I get the concepts. Now again, this is a reporter. This isn't an entrepreneur. I get the concepts, but it sounds like what you're basically pushing forward is to get, turn everybody into robots in your company. And I kind of smiled, and there was a couple other EOs at the table, and they kind of laughed. And I said, no, I get your point, but if you actually read the book and the way I meant it was you create the systems so the system becomes the robot, and that gives your team members more time to be creative and work on the business. So to your point, the people who saw it that way didn't last very long in the company. The people who saw it as, wow, finally, I know what the heck I got to do tomorrow, and I don't have to make it up as I go along. I can now work on this side project or this strategic initiative versus figuring out how the heck to get the payrolls out on time, which is just a system. That's all it is.
And it sounds like in that scenario, you were doing a good job of communicating to the team the purpose of all of these. Was that something that was coming directly from you, or did you have other members of the team that were responsible for that communication?
Yeah, good question. So this all came from Karen and myself to begin with, and something I see you were asking earlier about were some of the things people struggle with. When you finally get your executive team together, we had weekly meetings with our executive team. There's 5 of us, 5 executives plus Karen and myself, so 7 people. Every week it starts with lunch, and then you have a 45-minute meeting. The key takeaway from each of that meeting is every person that was at that meeting had one, no more than one, talking point that we were all aligned on when we left that meeting. So that there was none of this he said, she said, 2 ends against the middle. We communicated the same message, the same aligned transition plan that we were going to go forward with throughout the organization. And, people are creatures of habit. They like routine. Even if they say they don't, they do. So when we come out of these meetings and we'd sit down with our team and say, hey, here's where finance is going over the next, 7 to 10 days. Here's where sales is going the next set. And they knew no matter who they talked to on the leadership team, it was the same answer. That's a very reassuring, confidence-inspiring, communication style.
And that kind of takes me into the second part of the transition, as you call it, would be the decision matrix, and really just a checklist of who's responsible for signing contracts, who's responsible for signing a lease, who's responsible for 401ks, and just breaking that down. I think a lot of people listening right now, I think they would say I'm responsible for all 47 of those tasks, which is impossible to really to do a great job at. So was that something you implemented once you knew the transition was going to happen and started to give more responsibility to other people rather than you and your partner?
Yeah, so we had started loosely creating a document. It wasn't called the decision matrix. I mean, I worked for PepsiCo for 5 years out of college, and they had a thing called the decision tree, which it was similar, but it wasn't as buttoned down. It was a little more. It was a tree, so a lot more branches, a lot different kind of model, but it was the same context as get your head around who's in charge of what. So we realized that when we were going to put this transition plan together, Karen and I talked about that. I said, well, look, let's just get everything listed out and who's now having to touch it one way or another on the line items. And then let's look at how we could transition ourselves out of those boxes over, say, the next, 12 to 18 months. So it was, if you want to call it, the architecture or the blueprint of how we were going to move our people into those new roles and how we were going to build the systems behind each one of those line items.
And obviously a big part of being able to scale out of a business would be to find the CEO to kind of replace what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I love how you broke down both in your speech and in the book the 80% rule, and would love for you to kind of touch on that and how you came to that decision.
Yeah, and I don't know how many times I've done the talk, well over 100, but I would say the number one thing, decision matrix is the number one tool I hear back from people about. But the number one mindset shift I hear from people about is this 80% concept.
Yep.
And the hurdle, and I get pushback. I did a Vistage talk out in New York a couple of weeks ago, and this one guy kept pushing back on how hard it is to find this person. And finally, I decided to tell him, look, the reason you're not going to find the person is you've decided you don't want to find the person. So back to the original point, the entrepreneur has to be okay with 80%. And what I mean by this is, you are okay with hiring your clone, if you will, as long as they do at least 80% as well and perform 80% as well as you would have. In return for, you don't have to work in that job or role at all. So this binary, not 6 or 7 on a scale of 10, it's 1 or 0. It's thumbs up or thumbs down. When I'm talking about 80% performance, well, most owners, if I really press them, it's just me and that person talking, not in a room. And I say, look, honestly, if you got somebody doing 80% of what you can do today and you don't have to work at all, you're off doing angel investments, starting other companies, playing golf, out with your kids, I don't care, whatever it is.
Right.
Are you telling me you wouldn't be okay with that? And when you really press somebody, I've never had somebody say, no, I would not be okay with that.
So when you've determined that you're okay with that 80%, obviously you can't know for sure until they're in the business, and that's not the type of role where you want to have quick turnover. So what were some of the methods that you did to evaluate on the CEOs that you interviewed and eventually brought in, whether they were going to hit that 80% and not accidentally fall short and be at 60 or 50%?
Right, and then in the book I tell a little bit about this. So the first person I had to replace, though, for me was my sales director, because that was the main role I had in the company at the time. So I went out and I took the number two person. I'll keep the company out of the recording. I took the number two person at this company that was there and took them and had them convince them to come work for us. So whether it's a CEO, a sales director, an HR professional, a CFO, I think you have to go find and take that person. If it's going to be replacing a job role, a clone of your job role, I don't believe you're going to be nearly as successful running an ad or going to Indeed or hiring a headhunter. And honestly, you hire a headhunter, all they're going to do is go do what I did, which is they're going to go find the best person in their organization and entice them to leave. So
it's
that's,
go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. I was going to say that's where you have to start. So I mean that's where you have to start. And now all the things that to get them to the 80%, whether that's your own business techniques that are sound, and so you can kind of follow on those, whether it's a performance compensation package, whether it's some sort of an interview screening process with tests. I mean, every company's, in my experience, kind of different on that. How do you know there's 70? In the book, I say get somebody 70% of you and train the final 10%. You're gonna have to have your own. I guess I'm saying is there's no tried and true absolute silver bullet. Here's how I knew I had 70% of me.
Yeah, and about a week after Alchemy, Vern Harness came out here to San Diego, who created EO or founded EO, and the author of Scaling Up, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And he was talking about this as well. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. He said that you need to at least have the person in the company from 6 months to a year to see if they're going to be the right person to be that CEO. And usually it's someone that you've known for a long time, have worked on a project together with, or have worked in the business with. And history kind of tells, if you go out, like you just mentioned, and headhunt, that the success rate is pretty low.
Yeah. So again, fortunate for us, as I talk in the book, Seth, who ended up taking care of my role in the company, CEO and president, had been with the company almost 6 years when he took the role. So he was an attorney by trade, started out part-time with us. He was hire number 4 or something, 5, early years. I mean, he'd only been, I think we'd been in business 6 months when he came on. He started out as an operations manager, then director of ops, then VP of ops, then finally COO, and then eventually CEO and president. So we had that person internally. My point being, I think, to the question, though, is not everybody has that person in place or has that bench that they can pull from. And I said earlier, the top 3 things you need to look at were those, sales, ops, and then finance. The fourth area, and I work with this on bigger companies a lot, is building that bench. Just like in a team concept, you got to have that person that can step in and not only fill in for vacations and time off and all that, but that person who, when that other person, the so-called hit by a bus or basically just finds a better opportunity and leaves, they can step in and within less than 60 days, pretty much not miss a beat. And that is only possible, again, if you have the SOPs and systems in place.
Very cool. So, your book doesn't really dig into any particular industry where this is possible. And I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in the early years, that feel like, well, yeah, but in my business, this can't work. And there's been times that I've been guilty of that. Do you feel like the methods that you're describing in this book does not, necessarily need to go by any particular industry, and that this could be applicable to any line of business?
Again, another question I get a lot. So you made a statement there that I truly believe when you said, can't, yeah, but not can't. And when somebody starts saying can't to me, I say, you're absolutely right. Can't never did anything. So if you're going to come at this as you can't do it, you're right. Mm-hmm. And I only need 2 things to get anybody on the path of doing this in their company. They need to be coachable. So can't is not allowed. And they need to take action. If you're coachable and you take action, again, we tweak the model and we make the model unique to your business, but the concepts and the principles are business concepts and principles. I mean, these aren't some magical, rocket scientist type stuff here. This is basic business principles. You get the good people, you create the systems, you create the training, you give a path for leadership that people can see how they can move up in the company. You sell the sizzle, not the steak. You sell the vision. You get everybody aligned around it. And you set the BHAGs, whatever you want to call them, out there that everybody's going to go for. And then you just go like crazy. And can't doesn't enter into the conversation. So people, and I spoke at EMP in June. I was one of the speakers there, and this guy got up and basically went on, not a tirade, but went on the same kind of a conversation about can't. And after he was done, took him 30 seconds, I said, "You're right, you can't. So sit down." I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what else you tell somebody. I mean, it's frustrating to me as an entrepreneur because I do believe most entrepreneurs can achieve 10 times more than they even think possible.
Yeah.
But they've got to start by saying, we can do it. I mean, I know it's oversimplification, but we all have limiting beliefs. And when you start the sentence with I can't, you're right.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned as well, something that hit home with me was, do you own a business or do you own a job? And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, if you own a donut shop and you have to cook the donut 16 hours a day in order for it to run right, then you really own a job, not a business. And I think any entrepreneur that's listening right now can find ways to make their business through what you're saying or others are saying from scaling perspective to create that asset that can actually run without you there overall.
Oh yeah, and again, this is, it's this, how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. This is baby step type thing. And once you get it rolling, the power of this is once you're 3 to 6 months into this, it becomes geometric on the progression because you're not reinventing those little goofy steps where you first got started. And again, I've said this over and over again. I'm not saying this is easy. I don't say anywhere in the book, I've never said on stage or talking to entrepreneurs, this is easy. I'm just saying it is possible. It is doable. Not only did I do it, I've got, a couple dozen clients plus who I don't even know, some I don't even know, meaning they were never a client of mine. They just did what I told them to do in the book, who are actually probably working even less than I was at the time. So it's replicatable, it's doable. And these are all different kinds of industries too. I'm not just saying it has to be a payroll business or insurance. I mean, it can be different industries.
Yeah, to your point, just to share a quick, experience share for our company. But yeah, Brett and I have been working on, we are a 4-year-old company, never had job descriptions for our different positions at the company, which looking back at it seems absolutely crazy. But just sitting down and having job descriptions for each role and having an organizational chart and having a manual for each department, to your point, I'll just kind of echo that. Boy, oh boy, is it very frustrating at times and very time taxing. But once you get on the other side of it, as we're starting to get to, it really kind of opens up your eyes.
Yeah, and I think too with the 40-hour work year and a lot of these other books that I've been reading lately, the concepts are very simple. The execution is not easy, but very rarely do I have to reread a chapter over and over to get the point. It's like very simple business fundamentals that most people just don't do because they overcomplicate things. So that was my favorite part about this book, is that all of those concepts, anybody, even if you're just starting a company, can read it and understand those concepts, and then just getting in there and digging into doing the execution is the only hard part.
Absolutely. I'm a keep it simple, stupid type person. Why entrepreneurs, when they know the right way? Well, I know why. I mean, it's the focus problem. I've talked about this before. They take stuff that really is too easy and too straightforward, and they second guess themselves. They're like, well, it was that easy and that simple, I should have known that. And then they start putting icing and frosting and all kinds of sprinkles and stuff on a cupcake that just should have been a cupcake. I mean, just leave it alone. I mean, the time for tweaking is down the road. I mean, I talked about the SOPs too. Once you get a solid SOP, keep it in place for a while. Let it breathe. Don't just keep tweaking with it.
How much do you think ego comes into play where entrepreneurs or business owners think, well, I'm a unicorn. I'm the only person that can be in a room and make a sale. I'm the only person that can think of the next big idea. How much do you think that plays into this industry or this world that we live in?
Oh, I think it's gigantic. I mean, I was that guy. I mean, I was him first 3, almost 4 years probably. I had to be quoted in all the business journals. I had to be the one who, went out and got the awards. I was the one who was going to tell everybody how it needed to be done. I mean, you have to move to that place where you realize your team and what you've created, if it's created correctly, is going to be, again, geometrically more able to grow and do things than you can by yourself. It doesn't mean you don't still lead, but put your ego into something else. And you guys have probably met tons of them too. I'm not saying a strong driver, ego-based person. I think to really be successful in business, you have to have that in you. But deciding when and how to rein that in, depending on the situation in your company, is very important. I mean, there's tons of stories out there. I mean, of course, Steve Jobs is the classic one. But knowing, okay, this thing's now bigger than me. It's going to do better if I'm not involved. Go take your ego and get into something else. I mean, that's, if you really got to be that guy or that lady. I mean, that's how I would do it. I'd move. Don't start being detrimental to this wonderful company you've created.
Now, as an investor now in your previous work as an EO global volunteer, when you were looking at companies that you're going to invest either your time, money, or both into, what are you looking for? Because I'm assuming at the stages that you're visiting them, they're not perfect. But what are some of the key things that you'll look for in a company to decide to invest time or money?
Right. So, and I talked about this at Alchemy. It's in the book. It's passion, focus, and team. So most times, obviously, the team is not there. So when I say team, I'm saying they have a plan. They've created organizational charts 6 months, 12 months, 18, 24, 36 months out, showing how this company is going to grow as they expand. If the entrepreneur has not even taken the time to think about the team, and you remember my people principles, friendly, not friends, it's just a bunch of family and friends running this thing. For me, I tap out. That's not interesting to me. So I already know, and I've done 32. I've had 4 go bankrupt. I know when I got in trouble and how I got in trouble, and the team is usually the thing. Focus, again, talked about this. Really good entrepreneurs, myself included, are not real focused. But if this person I'm talking to who wants me to invest has not sat down and created a focused plan and actually said, here, on this timeline over the next 36 months, here's how we're going to do this. Here's the major goals and things we need to hit, I'm not going to be interested. And then usually the last thing, so I'm going backwards, but the last thing that they won't have is passion. Most people I meet have the passion, but the problem is sometimes it's not directed into the right areas. Or I'll get the person who's still working their day job while they're wanting to get this business going. And I'm very clear with people on that. So look, until you quit your day job and you jump off that cliff with no parachute, like I did, the passion is not going to be focused totally into this endeavor. And the last thing I'm going to do is write $100,000 check into something that you're not even working on full time.
Yeah, and to go backwards a little bit about tracking metrics, I think when it comes to KPIs, I like how you said what gets measured gets done, and to reward good behavior, good performance. I think a lot of times with businesses, oh shoot, Sally didn't run payroll, or oh shoot, Megan didn't send out the invoice. How often do you see that happening, and what is some of the tactics you use to make sure that people had those KPIs front and center at all times?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, and again, I learned this a while ago, probably early 2000s, ownership plus measurement equals accountability.
Love it.
Ownership plus measurement equals accountability. If you think about a performance or a disciplinary conversation with an employee, it is almost always around one or both of those items. So if inside, it's talked about having armed SOPs, actionable, realistic, measurable, and dated. If in a performance situation, again, job descriptions, all the things you talked about, if they do not know, have been told, have been given authority, have been delegated, not dumped on, that they own this, and then the measurement is not clear, was never set up, keeps changing, it is impossible for that person, I believe, or for myself, quite honestly, to be accountable, fully accountable. So to your examples of people missing things, I would always tell my team, go back and look in the mirror. Did you set them up to succeed, or did you set them up for failure?
Right.
Was the ownership crystal clear, and was the measurement crystal clear? Okay, if the ownership and the measurement are crystal clear, they're documented, they're in an SOP, you maybe even already had a discussion about it, then yes, the person needs to be disciplined. We have what we call a performance improvement process, would write them up in that, and talk about how we can get that corrected over the next 30 to 60 days.
When you talk about measurement, when you started to take more steps back away from the company during that transition, how were you able to check in and really get all the information you needed to know that everybody was doing their job correctly, that people weren't potentially hiding stuff, or clients weren't being serviced correctly? What methods did you use to make sure you were abreast of everything that was going on in the company day to day?
Yeah, and I didn't get to go into this on the talk because it was only an hour. And actually, a lot of this is not in the book because it's stuff that I just didn't have a place to put it. But the metrics or KPIs. So I had five key metrics that measured 95% of my company. And the reason I say 95% is I knew I could never get to 100. And I've done this talk and people read the book enough. Nobody's been able to come back to me and show me how they got to 98% or better. And it took me a long time to get these key metrics that I could trust and be comfortable in looking at, because as we all know, the P&L, the cash flow statement, all that stuff, that's all rear view mirror stuff. That's after everything's happened. So the metrics need to be forward looking, leading indicators out the windshield, so to speak. And these metrics that I created, again, if I went into detail over this call, it wouldn't make sense because they're unique to my industry.
Right.
But every industry can create these. They really give you not only a measurement of where you're at today, but they give you a measurement of where you're going to be in 30, 60, 90 days. So some of these key metrics would start, flatlining or going down in some cases. And I knew, to your point, that we had a personnel problem that needed to be addressed. And your people, if you have good people, they know this. So I'm not in the business at all. I'm not even in the office. I'm living in Las Vegas. The company's in Michigan. And I remember being on a call several times and saying to Seth, hey, we got a personnel problem, ... And he'd go, how do you know that? We just talked to him yesterday. I said, because it's a metric. So that's, when you get that tight on your metrics and they're really digging into some of those, say, nerves or pain points in your company, they can be a leading indicator for you to keep yourself out of trouble.
And this may be a silly analogy, but bringing it back to sports a little bit, I think the great thing about sports is there's a scoreboard and there's statistics. Me and Brett talk about this a lot. To your point, it sounds like if you have the right metrics, hey, we're shooting 20% from the three-point line. We need to go get a free agent that is a good three-point shooter because you're telling me that these guys are great shooters, but the metrics or the stats are telling me otherwise.
Correct. And so, back, again, I'm not a big sports analogy guy either, but it really rings true. That's why people use the sports analogies. It's the same thing. You need a team, you need a coach, you need a goal. I mean, it's business. Yep. So, what field are you playing on? What are the rules? What are the penalties? I mean, it's very similar. So you're correct. If the stats are indicating a certain situation is going on and you just want to pretend that's not it, well, that's not your fault. The data was there. It's the same with your metrics. The data is there.
I remember one of the first times we had, we do some on-site events for a lot of our clients, and Brett and I sent our team out to an on-site event for the first time without us there present. And it was a very, scary moment. We were just staying up at night, hoping to God everything went right. And thankfully, everything did go right. But when I read your book, I was very curious. When you made that 18-month transition, you moved to Vegas, you have the metrics, you got the CEO, you and Karen are in a good place, your business partner. What was the one thing that kept you up at night? Or did you feel totally in a great place where you knew everything was trackable and you guys were good to go?
Yeah, so good question. So there's one thing that I never let go of or never looked at or never stopped looking at. Now, the reason I don't talk about that much is because it was a quick, literally 30-second scan of the data, but it was our bank balance ledger. So it was a complicated business in that we were in 42 states. It was 23 entities spread over 42 states. So every morning, the beauty of me living in Vegas is it was Pacific Coast time and the office was in Michigan. They were East Coast time. Every morning, by the time I went in, 8 o'clock in the morning, whatever, my CFO had sent me the list, the trending list of the bank accounts up or down across all these entities and all these states and bank accounts. So that was, if you talk about keeping me up at night or worried about, was that because in our world, I mean, a typical month where, at the end, we were running close to 15 million through the accounts. And if heaven forbid, one of those, something went haywire or even worse, somebody stole from us, it'd all be over. Cause we were, the margins were not gigantic margins. So if there was any one thing that I would say kept me up at night, it was that, but I had a system for it. The real thing that kept me up at night, and this is just how I am, and I got asked this a lot when I first sold. I'd be talking to groups in Vegas at conferences about angel investing, and they'd say, well, what was the best thing about selling your business? Was it the freedom? Was it the money? Was it what? I said, no, I actually had most of that before I sold it. It was the lack of liability that I now had to deal with.
Interesting.
I mean, we were sued 27 times in 10 years.
Huh.
So when I say we were sued 4, but we were drawn into 23 other because of employment law. So wrongful termination, sexual harassment, EEOC, wage and hour, on and on and on. So the total relief of that weight off my back, because I knew once, if I ever got, I rarely got called or text, but if I did, it was because somebody just served us. So the fact that now when people text or called me, it was almost always good. It was almost always good news.
Well, how many depositions have you had to sit through?
I've done 6.
Ugh.
6. Yep.
Not fun.
So,
Yeah.
Nope. Never fun. And anybody that tells you it's fun is just a liar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
and speaking of liability, you touch a little bit on debt in the book. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the early stages you guys took an SBA loan, and
Which he says never to do.
Never to do. So I think, it wasn't really a conscious decision necessarily. We never discussed going out and getting funding, but in hindsight, I'm really happy that we did, because we went down.
And you mean that we bootstrapped it?
That we bootstrapped. We didn't take on any debt, but it wasn't like we made this decision like, hey, we're definitely going to bootstrap. We just didn't have any options. We didn't have anybody that was, we weren't in a place to go and get money at the time anyway. In hindsight, that worked out really well for us, because our first model wound up being just not really something that the market was interested in, and we were able to shift very quickly because we had to pay rent. We had to bring in money immediately. So it really forced us into profitability because we didn't have this cushion. And I think if we'd have had even $25K, we'd have burned through it, ran out of money, and then found that second business model that's led to what we're doing now. But in this time and age, I talk to so many people who think that the step one of starting any new business is to go out and get an investment. So when you're coaching some of these newer companies, I'm assuming that you've run into that. What is your take on debt with the companies that you're coaching or investing in?
Yeah, so typical, and I will always make this statement first and foremost when I talk to anybody. Now, I have a system I take people through if they want to have me look at investing in them, which, I probably don't have time to go through today. But the first question I always ask is, do you really need the money? Because if you don't really need the money, don't take it. There's not, a business partnership is a marriage without sex. So
I like that.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
So you're now going to be married to these investors.
Yeah.
And if you take in small numbers, let's say you get somebody in there at 50 grand, they've never stroked a check into a company before, and now they lose their job, and that money they were counting on your investment to return to pay for Timmy's college now needs to come out now because they lost their job and they want their money. How are you going to deal with that? And these are real life situations. So, number one, if you really don't need the money, bootstrap it, make it happen, find a way to make it happen. I mean, I talk more people out of investing with me than I ever would bring into investing with me. Number two is, what is it they ultimately want to become? So if somebody says, I need to raise $1.6 million to do this and that and that, and the only thing they're talking about doing is building a $10 million business, I'm going to call BS on that. Because why do you need to raise $1.6 million to become $10 million? Now, if you want to raise $1.6 million to become 30, 40, maybe. But I guess what I'm saying is they've never sat down and actually worked out the multiple of where they are and where they want to go. So thirdly would be the market they're in. So one of my big questions is, how big is this market? I get people coming to me wanting me to invest in these ideas, like a Shark Tank idea, and ultimately maybe the market's $150 million market. Well, just by pure number and competition, there's not going to be a return on the investment. So if they're not at least $1 billion market, which still isn't that big, but if they're not at least just $1 billion market, to me, they should rethink even getting investment at all. And then lastly, which again is kind of probably first, is the business model actually viable for what it is they're saying they're going to bring to market?
Love it.
I see this a lot. I got a client, I'll be out in Kansas City in 2 weeks, and they'll do $25 million, but they've been doing $25 million for 5 years. And the reason they've been doing $25 million for 5 years, which again, I don't feel sorry for them, that's a good number, but their business model is now broken. I mean, we've all heard of Blockbuster, right? I mean, their business model is broken. They have not changed. They have not taken on the risks and the opportunities they should have. And now we got to go in and basically restructure the whole business model.
It's funny you mentioned Blockbuster. I think on this show, Brett and I have talked about that 5 or 6 different times. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, geez, there was a time where that's all anybody ever talked about, especially when I was younger. I mean, wow, Blockbuster, wow, what a business.
Yeah, I think it was 5. They were worth $5 billion, and then Netflix pretty much came in and they went gone.
Yep.
So for the listener out there, let's say they own a retail T-shirt shop and they're making $700,000 a year. They've been in it for a couple of years. They're doing good. They have a few employees. What's your number one recommendation? I would think that if you're in your first few months of the company, trying to talk about your next CEO or making a bunch of SOPs may not be the best part in the first couple of months. But in that scenario, when you have a few years underneath you, you got a staff or a team underneath you, what's the number one thing that people should work on today when it comes to making their business an asset?
Yeah, good question. And I used to do this when I was an accelerator, and I have several examples. One of them I'll kind of share with you. So had these two individuals in the Arizona chapter, and they were both ran physical therapy clinics. So one of them had 2 physical therapy clinics. One of them had 3. One was doing $700,000 a year. One was doing $500,000 a year. So what do you think my advice to them was the second time I met with them?
Combine?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and why they should combine was the same reason Karen and I were so successful. I was the sales and marketing side and more of the strategy side. Karen was the ops and HR side and more of the in-house side. The two together on the teeter-totter, so to speak, are a dramatic way to scale a business. So these two guys came together. One was really strong on the sales, marketing, and visionary side. The other was just a total in-house ops SOP guy. They came together. They're immediately $1 million too. Now in the EO world, what was the other nice thing about that? They got to immediately move from accelerator to EO, which expanded their network, got them connected with a lot more entrepreneurs. I just got done 2 weeks ago doing a quarterly session. He bought the one partner, bought the other partner out. He's now about to open his 10th clinic.
Wow.
And he'll probably hit almost $9 million this year.
Good for him.
That was 3 years ago.
Yeah, I will say with our business, I think an epiphany or aha moment was about 2 years in or 2.5 years in, Brett and I were sharing all responsibilities. If we signed the client, hey, you take this client, I'll take this client. Every sales call we were on. And we finally came to a fork in the road. We said, Brett, you're better at sales. David, you're better at operations. Let's put a Chinese wall between us. You handle all the sales, and that's your responsibility, and I'll make sure everything runs right. And since that moment, I think there's been growth, obviously, but there's been very clear KPIs on both the 50-50 business partners of what we're responsible for and kind of be able to take ownership over our role.
Exactly. So if people are struggling, again, I see this over and over again, Accelerator. I don't know how familiar you are with the program, but they struggle with this because they're really strong on one side of the operation or the sales piece, but they're very weak and or actually have a total distaste or dislike for that side of the business. So not only are they letting that side of the business go, and if it's sales, it really hurts you because you have nothing coming in.
Yeah.
But they start to bleed that side of the business. They cut into the bone of the company because they won't give it the resources and time and allocation it needs.
To your point, if you're amazing at sales and you're bringing all these clients, but then the clients don't get served correctly, then your business fails and vice versa. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, the 40-hour work year. Once again, I recommend all our listeners to buy the book, and I think it applies to every business, no matter where you are, to get a sense of where you should be going. But tell us a little bit about what you're doing day to day now.
Sure. Well, I lived in Las Vegas 15 years, so I just moved to a town called Spicewood, Texas, which is west of Austin, about 20 miles. So
nice.
The last 6, just moved here in June. So my oldest daughter just got married this last weekend. So
congratulations.
quite honestly, the last 4 months have been moving and getting kids into college and getting them married and moving on. But basically what I do is I work with around 30 clients. I coach them anywhere from quarterly to annually on strategy, sales, marketing, finance, all those different areas, people and stuff. I speak at about a dozen either conferences or Vistage groups or forum group type things. And then I'm invested in 3 different angel investments. So it was 4 companies, one of them cashed out last month. So I'm invested in 3 angel businesses, and that doesn't take a lot of my time, but it's 5-ish hours a month on the angel side, and then 3 to 4 months a year coaching and speaking, spread out over the course of a year.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of entrepreneurs' dream is to scale their company, get to a point where they can help others and kind of use their knowledge that they've learned through trial and error to assist other businesses in the same type of issues.
Yeah, it's the learn, earn, return model, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I'm not one. I just turned 51. I'm not one who's gonna play golf every single day or totally check out. I love helping businesses. I love helping entrepreneurs. I mean, I can't imagine not doing it forever. Meaning, as long as I'm excited, I'm passionate about it. I mean, I honestly learn as much or more than anybody I work with because I'm learning about a whole new space or business or new model they're going after. And I mean, it's it's exciting. And then of course, once in a while, which has happened, an opportunity comes up for me to invest in something that I learned about. So that's a really cool way to go. So.
Well, very enlightening. I really enjoyed the talk, Scott. Once again, the 40-hour work year, how to become a passive investor in your business. We recommend you checking it out. And Scott, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you. It was great talking to you guys.
All right, Scott.
Thanks.
Take
Talk
care.
soon.
All right.